Hey guys, the Common Man here. So I wanted to give kind of a long or longer term review of this guy here, the Leatherman ARC. Um, this thing has just absolutely blown me away. So obviously when it first came out, I was very excited about it because of the MagnaCut steel. I really was interested in picking up a multi-tool that could take the place of the pocket knife that I would normally carry in my pocket, because I just didn't want to carry a multi-tool and a pocket knife. I'm minimalist when it comes to what's in my pockets. I want to keep it very simple. And this really has filled that place for me. So I do a lot of different projects. Obviously, for anyone who's following my boat project, and I promise I'll get another video up soon enough. But anyway, anyone who's following that knows that I use this thing all the time on that project. I also do a lot of painting, residential painting. This is in my pocket every time I'm painting, or really doing anything around the house, anything out in the yard, around our property. This is going to be in my pocket. And the blade, I can tell you, has held up unbelievably well. It holds an edge so long. And honestly, when it starts to get dull, this thing strops up. I don't know how, because MagnaCut's a pretty hard steel, but it strops up pretty quickly, pretty easily, and back to a razor sharp edge. In no problem, in no time. Literally 30 seconds to strop it, and then it's back to shaving hairs. It's just crazy. But overall, like I said, I'm just so impressed with this. Obviously, people were concerned about these cutting heads. I already did a video on that. I haven't had an issue. Just to give you an idea of how badly I've abused it. So we put up a chicken coop on the property, and I was cutting through what do they call it? Hardware cloth, something like that. And I mean, I'm talking yards and yards. Oh gosh, I think it was like 20 or 30 yards of hardware cloth we had to put up, and I had to cut it 48-inch long rolls, I guess you'd say, or wide rolls, and I had to cut it at multiple locations. So I was literally just one at a time cutting each little section of that those little squares, and I just without even thinking, I was just cutting section after section after section, and I don't know how many hundreds of cuts I made. I did not damage these cutter heads one bit, and again, I was not being careful where I was putting the wire. I was just cutting just haphazardly. It didn't matter, and I'm telling you, it took it no problem. So again, yards and yards of that stuff, and I have not had a chip. I have no deformation on those cutting heads, no problems at all. So I don't know, did I get lucky? Maybe, I'm not sure, but it just wasn't an issue for me. And again, I'm not cutting nails, I'm not cutting screws. You shouldn't be cutting screws with one of these, honestly. But take that for what it's worth. I've had an excellent experience with it. So that's just one thing I really wanted to point out. As far as the durability of the pliers themselves, I have just beat on these things. I've undone bolts. I've undone stuck screws that were just barely sticking out. I've pried with this. I've used it as a hammer. It's got this little hammer surface here, and I mean, closing paint cans is probably one of the lightest duty things I've used this hammer for. I have beat on this, and it just absolutely just keeps on going. One thing that I did do as soon as I got it, I didn't love how free the pivots were. So I promise it's not sticking. It's just hard to do that one hand sometimes. But one thing I did was I tightened up the pivots up here on the head. I just didn't love how freely it moved. So I gave it just a little bit of a crank just to tighten it up just a hair. And now it is just right. Just enough friction where it's not just flopping around necessarily. But it also is nice and tight now. Very little movement in that handle, a little bit, but it came with a lot more than that. So that's one modification that I've done, and I'm really happy I did it. And it hasn't changed. It hasn't loosened up or anything like that, so it's holding up very well. Again, the blade, it just keeps going. It just cuts and cuts and cuts. And honestly, once it starts getting dull, you take it to a strop, 30 seconds, and it's back to razor sharp. And I'm telling you, I have used this blade on some crazy stuff. I try not to cut fiberglass with a knife, and for the most part, I usually don't. I've definitely taken this to fiberglass here and there, and it's held up very well. I've used it to cut out fiberglass. I'm sorry, not fiberglass, but cardboard. I use it to cut out molds for different pieces of plywood that I've had to lay into the boat. Yeah, I mean, it just keeps on going and going. So it's really performed extremely well. Blade play is still very minimal, tiny little bit, but again, this isn't a high-end dedicated pocket knife. It's a multi-tool, so I expect a tiny bit of blade play, but still very minimal there. One thing that I do with this knife, which is an absolute abuse of or multi-tool, is I'll have it in my pocket while I'm sanding drywall all of the time. So this is constantly getting filled up with drywall dust and fiberglass dust for that matter. And honestly, what I do every once in a while, I'll take a can of WD-40, I'll spray it down, I'll work all the actions, maybe even wash it out with some soap and water, and I'll let it dry, make sure I oil it up real good afterwards. But it just goes right back to working perfectly well every time. Everything is still, I don't know why I'm sticking to my surface here. Every tool is still perfectly one-hand accessible, easily closed with one hand. The knife, it was never like flickable, but I never expected it to be. The saw, all of the big tools, I don't know why I'm struggling here, I promise it's not hard. All of the big tools still open with one hand, no problem. Scissors cut very well. Everything about this is just still as good as the day I got it. It works well. You can see it's got some paint on it. And then as far as corrosion goes, it's really not an issue. I mean, I sweat like crazy with this thing in my pocket, and I just haven't had any problems. Again, if it's a long, hard day where I know I've been sweating a ton, I'll take it out of my pocket and I'll make sure I give it a good spray down with some WD-40 or some kind of oil or something. So I'm not totally abusing it in that sense, but it really does. It does very, very well. I was worried about the corrosion aspect, and it's just something that I'm just no longer worried about. And then the size of it, like let's talk about that. It's perfect. It's not too big. It's not really all that heavy. I want to show it up against my Spyderco Paramilitary 2. You can see its profile is actually quite a bit smaller than the Paramilitary 2. Let's even compare it up against the Para 3. You can see it's very similar in its profile, or I guess it's the amount of space it takes up. Thickness, of course, it's thick. It's definitely thicker. That's the Para 3. You can see considerably thicker, but it's not absurd. I mean, if you're wearing a pair of jeans or a relatively heavy pair of shorts, you're hardly even going to know it's there. It's just not a problem. And the other thing too is the price. I know a lot of people didn't love the price on this guy, but again, let's talk about that. MagnaCut blade steel is not cheap. Any knife that you get that's a MagnaCut, usually you're at least $100, right? So you're talking $100 knife basically in a multi-tool, and then a good multi-tool, you're also talking right about $100, if not more. Leatherman Wave, you're well over $100, $130. So let's say you get a nice Leatherman Wave quality multi-tool, which this is 100%, if not better. So you got $120 there, plus a $100 knife essentially. So yeah, $230. I don't think that's asking too much from Leatherman. I think it's right on par with where this should be. Maybe a little high, but again, it's all up for interpretation and how you feel about it. I feel okay about it, especially having used this as much as I have. It's taken it, and it'll just keep on taking it. I see no signs of this thing slowing down. I haven't even had to sharpen this knife. Again, I strop it. I've stropped it probably 3 or 4 times now. I've never had to take it to a stone, and I've owned this thing, I don't know how long. I mean, at least 6-7 months. Go ahead and look at the video that I uploaded when I first got it. That's about how long I've owned it, and I carry it multiple times a week. And anytime I'm doing any kind of heavy-duty projects, this is in my pocket. So, yeah, I mean, I wish I had some actual hard data to show you. I'm not really into that. I just kind of go by how I feel and what my gut tells me. But I can tell you what, this thing has blown me away. I'm extremely happy with it. If you're curious about picking one of these up, I would do it, especially if you're in the trades. That one-hand operation I thought was kind of a gimmick. I really didn't think it was a big deal. I didn't think I was going to really care for it so much. It is huge, and it makes it so that this is the only multi-tool I really want to have in my pocket, just because it's totally one-hand operational. That's huge. That's a huge thing for me, and it never was until I experienced it. So, something to consider. you know, while we got the bit out. The bits actually work extremely well too. I'm very happy with these. It would be nice to have a full-size bit, but the fact that you get all these other tools in here makes the you know, what do you call that, half-size bits, it makes it worth it in my opinion. Plus, if you need a screwdriver, you need a screwdriver. This is a get you out of a pinch kind of a tool. It's not a precision tool. It's not a purpose-built tool for any of the tools that it includes. This is just to get you out of a pinch, and I'm telling you, it will quite reliably. So anyway, that's the Leatherman ARC. That's my longer term review of this tool. Yeah, I would pick it up. Anyway, thanks for watching, guys. I appreciate it. Leave a like, leave a comment if you'd like to, and stick around for more of my knife and EDC videos, which I should be uploading hopefully more often. Thanks. Bye.